Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in-store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here's Sri and Peter. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. I am your co-host, Peter V.S. Bond. I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host Sri Rajagopalan, and we are entering the sixth part of a six-part series called Living in an Omnichannel World. And our special guest for all six episodes has been Bryan Gildenberg of Omnicom. Bryan, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
It's good to be back for six times the charm. Hopefully we'll get it right this time. So I'm Bryan Gildenberg, the SVP eCommerce for the Omnicom Retail Group. The collection of agencies within Omnicom, the massive global media company that specialize in retail in all its forms. Digital, physical, QSR, telecom. You pick it. You pick it. We'll do it. Probably better known to most of you by the trading agencies the brands operate under, which are Integer, TPN, Tracy Lock, TMA, and Haygarth over in the UK. So prior to that, I know many of you from the 23 years I spent at Kantar, overseeing the global retail research practice there. So great to be back for time number 6, and it's kind of sad it's the last one. So
we saved the best for last. Awesome. This is where we engage.
What I hear is he's willing to come back for more. So we'll send. We're going to follow.
Sure, we'll get this. We'll get this down by time.
Series every week or two. It'll be great.
Oh, it's great.
Well, we saved the best for last. For Sri and I, we've been talking about engaging in some rank punditry on the industry, and this is our opportunity to talk about predictions for the future of retail. I know that we all love to do that, and we don't want to be held accountable in the future for it, but it's sure nice to predict where we think things are going to go.
Coming from the knowledge captain himself.
Yeah, so we're going to get him on the record, and then we'll come back in a future episode and
see how wrong all of these were. So,
all right. So, reality or myth? The tipping point for e-commerce has finally arrived. Thoughts?
I think it depends on what you mean by tipping point. But I would say if you held me to yes or no, I'd say no. And I know that's counterintuitive and not the message of the day, since everybody's so jacked up about it. So I'll play devil's advocate to it for a minute, and not because e-commerce isn't important, but because I think that from a shopper point of view, though e-commerce expanded dramatically during the COVID era, as we've discussed in earlier podcasts, not all that's going to stick. So I do think you're getting to a point where you would have seen an acceleration in the growth of e-commerce, which has been a deeply linear phenomenon. So my objection to the phrase tipping point in terms of from a shopper retailer point of view is that relatively gradual and consistent trends don't really have a tipping point. They just kind of move. So I think that from a shopper point of view, I think that's probably where you're going to be. I think the growth trend for the next 5 years will be more linear than exponential. So from that point of view, no, I don't think it's a tipping point. From a brand's point of view, maybe. And decisions that managers make are driven as much by narrative as by reality sometimes. I think the narrative may have changed enough that the resourcing decisions that people are making for 2021 and 2022, which they're making now in the context we're operating in, I think will enable a critical mass on the brand side that might be more acute than the actual shift in shopping behavior. So for shoppers, I would say not a tipping point, but that's only because I don't think there ever will be one. I think it's a continuum. I think for brands, maybe.
Bryan, I think about the average salesperson or the salesperson in e-commerce is probably losing sleep right now over 100% growth plan that they delivered in Q1 and Q2 this year, and how they have to replicate it next year. Because into the budget.
Don't even get me started on the amount of dumb planning that's going to be done for 2021. So it's like, look, if you ever wanted to do zero-based budgeting, this is the time, because the numbers you're working off of are utterly unreplicable. So why would you even try? Like, I just don't get the way companies are approaching this, which is, it's a tough number, but we're going to have to hit it. No, it's silly. You're going to spend a ton of money trying to do something that's just a mathematical coincidence. That's weird.
So with Peter and I decided I get to ask you the coolest question of the 6 episodes,
Woo!
which is voice and AI.
Okay.
Voice and AI, Bryan, is it just a passing trend, or is it immortal to live here forever and everybody better hop on?
I feel like that little girl GIF that appears on the internet. Why not both? I think because I would say, again, forced to choose, I would go with eternal rather than trend, just because, especially AI, which is, AI, the ability for computers to solve more problems without human intervention is a trend that's going to continue forever. So yes, AI will become a bigger part of that, and it's really all about the problem that you're trying to solve. I think with voice, is going to end up being one of those things that has some very specific applications that make sense. I don't think it's as transformational a commercial platform as other people do, but that's just my own personal kind of hesitancy. Modern retail, self-serve retail was invented in 1920, basically in the UK and the US, right? So if you're a Brit, you'll attribute it to Sainsbury's. If you're American, you'll attribute it to Piggly Wiggly or King Cullen, depending on where you're from. Since then, the history of shopping has been a 100-year pursuit of not using your voice when you shop. So the entire purpose of modern retail is to not have to talk to the shopkeeper. So, I've often described Alexa as the world's slowest Corona owner, right? I mean, why? I think voice has some very specific applications. I think specifically when over time it gets tied better to screen. I think so often people think about voice in terms of Alexa and skills, or in terms of the Google Home Assistant. I think there's two vastly more interesting and important applications of voice. Number one is the enormous quantity of search today that gets done through voice rather than typing, which has a very different syntax to it. And understanding that, I think, is really important. And second is, I do think that eventually, as devices move to being voice and screen enabled, the ability to respond to voice with something that isn't voice becomes very powerful.
I'll just be happy when my Alexa stops activating every time a commercial about Alexa comes on the television. That really irritates me.
Yeah, my favorite is when you have two of them in the same room, and one of which hears you say Alexa, and the other one of which hears your response. Like, I don't.
Well, I've been in many business planning sessions on brand and retail sides, and all too often in the past, after all this tremendous work is done, at the last minute, someone says, hey, email the digital team and have them send over their 3 slides. So are we going to see e-commerce and digital be a serious and important component of business plans going forward?
Yeah, and I think this is deeply related to the answer to question 1. And I think yes, and I think this is one of the reasons why I think this tipping point moment will occur. And these things don't happen because they're the right thing to do. They happen because the forces of change overcome the forces of inertia, right? So, and I think there are enough forces of change, and in particularly for US brands that are listening to this podcast today, Walmart's going to push everybody there. Amazon's not. And, and I think the more you need to get an omni-channel Walmart joint business plan, you're just going to change the way you do joint business planning for everybody, because the Walmart team's got enormous gravitational pull. So in that case, yes, I think you're looking at, 3 years from now, that'll be true at the JBP level. From a strat plan point of view, I don't think the average board of directors is going to be comfortable with a management team that doesn't have e-commerce as part of its strat plan. I don't think you're going to get to keep your job as a CEO if you can't do that. So.
It's a profound statement, Bryan. So the next one is a fact or fiction question, Bryan, and that is Amazon really the only or biggest beneficiary of the current pandemic from a retail standpoint?
Well, only and biggest are two very different questions. They may be the biggest. They're certainly not the only. And I, you and I have talked about this a lot. The concentration of the American retail ecosystem is way overblown. And I don't know, most people that think America is a concentrated retail world have never been to any other one. So, if you're a brand, you're like, oh God, the customers have so much power here. Try Canada. Loblaws 55% of the market for a consumables company there. That's a customer with power. You know, in most markets in the world, you have 3 or 4 retailers or 80 or 90% of the market. You don't have that here, and you won't. The America's too big and too polarized for one retailer to serve all of it. So no, Amazon won't be the only one.
All right, another one. Brick and mortar stores, they're done with. We're moving to e-commerce, be it BOPUS or home delivery or ship to home. True or false?
Not true, but not entirely false. And I think there's a severe economic problem with anything that's what I'll call mall-based. So, malls aren't really the primary focus of our type of conversation, and that's a different topic for a different day. But yeah, I think mall-based retail's got a host of problems that are going to be very difficult to overcome. So I'm not sure that malls make a comeback. But look, I think right now, even with McKinsey's most exaggerated and breathless statistic on e-commerce, you're still looking at over 70% of the American retail world that's being sold through stores, and that's with vast quantities of retail square footage closed. So I think America is going to be a predominantly store-based retail shopping world for as long as it matters. At some point, it'll stop mattering because the integration between the store and the online experience will be seamless, and you're just not going to be able to know or care whether a purchase is, quote, store-based or not. But until that moment, America will be more store-based than digital.
Well, I'm going to jump to the drug channel. Often the drug channel has not gotten a great deal of pat on their backs for.
No, we're 5.5 episodes into it. I don't think we've talked about it once.
I feel the drug channel is one of those in the last 3-4 months during the current epidemic really picked up its step on digital retail. Yeah. And also became the favorite kind of neighborhood store for most people, because most large stores will have physically closed, or you had to drive to it and you had a shelter-in-place order and things of that nature. Does the drug channel make a comeback in a big way when all this is said and done?
If I had to go yes or no, I would go no. And that's got nothing to do with anything you've just mentioned. It's just you have to remember that what you've just mentioned is a tiny part of a drugstore's business, particularly CVS, where retail is a tiny part of CVS's company. Non-pharmacy retail is a tiny part of their retail business. Online is a tiny part of their non-pharmacy retail business, and click and collect is a tiny part of their online business. So yes, Peter's very graphically showing and look, all kudos to them. They're doing nice work, and
let me complete the play.
Yeah, it's a really, really, I think the future of the drugstores is so much more dependent on what happens to the economics of pharmaceutical distribution than anything else, that I wouldn't say yes that this is going to change the drugstore's fortunes materially without massive evidence that something else was happening in the healthcare ecosystem that changed the way that drugstores are going to distribute prescriptions. I think over time, the economics of the prescription industry are going to fundamentally change drugstores in a way that I think they'll end up looking very different than they do now, but that's a different topic for a different podcast.
Yeah, I think the drug channel could flip the model that CVS built with Target, where Target realized they were losing money with pharmacy, but they needed the traffic draw. And so they sold their in-store pharmacies to CVS. CVS is making money, obviously, off of its pharmacy, but the front of the store, to your point, is a decreasingly important component of their overall business model. And so selling the front of the store at Walgreens or CVS.
It's basically what Walgreens is doing now. So where Kroger's starting to take over their food section, FedEx has taken over what used to be the photo area, with all that stuff. Yes, I think that makes sense for a drugstore, to be honest. The proximity they bring to the table is probably of more value to other people than it is to the way in which they're choosing to monetize it right now.
I see Amazon lockers in every store across the country in no time. In any event, yeah. So click and collect, it's here to stay, and it's going to be the primary driver of growth within e-commerce.
I think for grocery, yes, and have always thought that. We talked about this quickly on an earlier podcast. I think American shoppers are far more likely to find a solution convenient when they can determine when they're going to go pick it up in their car rather than when they need to be home. Americans are car-based, particularly when we start to get back to more normal life, particularly suburban families with kids, who are the people that buy a disproportionate amount of the groceries in America. That the click and collect model here also economically just makes more sense for the retailers. You know, if you look at the geographic distribution of the United States, and then you look at the model that we always try to draw from an e-commerce point of view, it's the UK. The UK doesn't look anything like the US from a population distribution point of view. The UK actually looks a lot like a scrunched up sideways version of Canada. So the country that the US looks the most like is France, from a geographic distribution point of view. All of e-commerce grocery in France is click and collect for the same reason that it'll probably be click and collect here, which is just, it's too hard to build a model of last mile logistics that doesn't involve stores here. People just don't live close enough together. So if the stores are going to be involved, then it's just the economic trade-offs between somebody being able to use their car out on a variety of errands and bring it back versus somebody having to pay for the delivery piece is just, it's just too compelling the other way. So yeah, click and collect and grocery will be huge. I think for other categories that aren't grocery, that'll be a mix.
Well, the final question of this entire series goes to Shri, and to quote the immortal words of the knight at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Shri, choose wisely.
I'm honored I get the last word, so I am going to choose wisely, and it has to come with my last one-year theory of the wonderful NACDS down in Florida, Bryan, where you and I run into each other every single year for a while.
Yeah.
And the occasional dip in Arizona by Camelback Resort.
Yeah.
So, and the question, Bryan, is I've had the theory that with this shifting focus into digital retail, that there will come a point in time at NACDS where the retailer, as most of you know, NACDS, the primary purpose is to have the top to top and discuss an innovation pipeline.
Right.
So is there a world coming up in the next year where the customer, the retailer is asking a brand, if you want to bring an innovation pipeline to me and get it in store, I want to see a test and learn with data that you've already tried it in some limited scale and it's going to work?
I'm going to change my answer that I had for this and probably say yes, and here's why. You're going to be competing for shelf space, mostly, in all likelihood, with brands that have built a presence somewhere else, either through D2C or through smaller outlets. They're going to have a fact set that comes to that when they come to the table that allows them to say, here's what we're doing, here's how it will amplify, and here's how we take our audience, which we know, and then attach it to your audience segments and amplify it in a very natural, logical, and digital way. So I actually think, as I think through the answer to this, that I don't think data on innovation is going to be particularly critical. What you're going to need is an audience in order to use the retailer's broader ecosystem to amplify it. And you're not going to be able to have an audience without some sort of activity. If I'm a retailer and I have a choice between two brands, one of which has a proven audience with data behind it that I know I can bolt into my ecosystem. The other one has a hypothetical segmentation that isn't tied to any behavior, but is just mapped against some other brand. I'm going to pick the one that's real. So yeah, I think that this ability to test and learn, to be able to get to enough data about an audience, to be able to construct an audience well enough, to be able to bolt it into the ecosystem is the big piece. And, as segments become audiences, that's probably, of all the things we haven't talked about yet, probably the most profound change that's going to happen to the marketing ecosystem. A world of audiences is a more bottom-up world. The world of segments is a very top-down world. And I think that can rewire away a lot of the way that innovation takes place. If you thought about what's the audience that's going to, not congeal, it's the wrong word, coalesce around this brand proposition, and then how easily can I amplify that audience through data retargeting and lookalike modeling into a bigger audience, and how do I use the retailer's audience-based ecosystem to be able to do that? So,
Bryan, what I really take away from that is, if you're walking in with an audience and explaining what the audience is, D2C is really non-negotiable anymore. but I don't mean a scale D2C for 50,000 points, competing with 50,000 points of distribution. It's really for this very experimentative test and learn approach.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to we're not talking about media anymore because that was the last podcast, but it gets back to the single greatest thing I've heard about media in my entire life, which is the old chairman of Group M, Erwin Gottlieb. We were in a meeting once, and Erwin had a way of saying stuff like this that was really profound, just offhand. He goes, "Hey, you know what? The whole history of making money in media is when somebody knows more than somebody else." And that observation is so powerful when you actually apply it to the world that we're in now. The purpose of D2C for most companies won't be to sell stuff. It'll be to be on the right side of what I'll call the Erwin Gottlieb equation. How do I know enough so that in retail media, somebody doesn't know more than I do? And right now, the people that know more than I do are Google and Facebook, who walled garden that knowledge off in a way that creates enormous economic advantage for them. And without knowing something, that's going to be difficult. That being said, D2C propositions that are only built to gather data fail. You need a real reason for that proposition to exist. Sorry, I know I probably went over time by answering that, but I think it's a really, really, really important.
No, I thought it was a must address.
Yeah.
Well, Bryan, I think you proved to our audience that you know a lot more about this than Sri and I do. And we are so grateful. I don't know that proved
any of that, but I talked more than you did. But
I bow down to my mentor.
We'll agree to disagree. But in any event, we're so grateful to have had you for this 6-part series. What a tremendous episode. What a tremendous series. Sri, any parting words on your end before I go into our closing?
Bryan, thank you so much again. I mean, we talked a lot about the consumer, about retail. We talked about specific retailers, about opportunities, about where media, my favorite topic, is going to go. I can't thank you enough, and you're always welcome back in the show. I hope you will come back, and we will be in a conversation with 3 of us so we can provide much more value to our audiences, though, whether they listen, whether they read, or whether they watch.
Anytime, guys.
Peter, as always, thank you.
Yeah, we're going to give him tenured professorship in our audience. In any event,
super.
I'll remind all of our followers that if you want to see our content on LinkedIn or YouTube, you can follow hashtag SriandPVSB. That's SRIANDPVSB. If you want to see a playlist of all our YouTube videos, you can certainly go to tinyurl.com/SriandPVSB, spelled the same way as the hashtag, without the hashtag. And if you want to see our podcast on any one of 13 platforms and growing, you can go to tinyurl.com/CPG podcast. They're all on the screen below. Again, Bryan, thank you for joining us. Sri, thank you. And we look forward to our next episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Until then, Sri and I saying goodbye. Bye, Sri.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.